For anyone who's been a fan of this channel for a while, you may recall that I'm a pretty big fan of Spider-Man. This channel originated as an animation channel, centered around a fan adaptation series I did of the old Webhead, animated using Pivot stick figure animator. I tried branching off doing other series and other kinds of animation, but that part of my channel never really took off. Fast forward all these years and now I get to cover whatever kind of content I want, and it's been really liberating. But my passion for the wall crawler has never really gone away. I still idolize the person Peter Parker is, and I hope to maintain even an ounce of his principles and morality as I carry myself through adulthood. Even if Marvel editorial doesn't let him get that far in their main serialization. In his most recent iteration on the big screen, Spidey has gone through some harrowing trials. At the end of No Way Home, Peter did battle with the Rogues Gallery from other movies' timelines and lost his Aunt May. And in order for him to resolve the situation, Doctor Strange was forced to cast a spell that caused everyone in his universe to forget who Peter Parker was, carefully stitching together the fabric of reality and sending the multiversal interlopers back to where they belong. This left Peter Parker in an interesting position. The entire world, across all planets and space, forgot who he was. He has no more friends, no more study buddies, no more shoulders to cry on. Even if he deeply loved the people around him, he can no longer interact with them and is forced to live his life by himself now. Though it's not all bad, as the movies would like to insinuate. People everywhere still know Spider-Man. They know his deeds within the city and his camaraderie with the Avengers. Peter just has to forge a new path for himself, which he seems intent on doing. He's moved to the big city with his own little studio apartment. He's continuing his education, forced to drop out and commit to his GED. He may have lost everyone, but he still has everything to gain. A blank slate, ripe for the picking. That being said, I think it's about time we filled that blank slate with a bunch of superhero nonsense. With talks about the fourth installment in Spidey's MCU lineup entering production, I felt like now is probably my best time to enter the foray into what we'd get out of the next movie. So today I've gathered a list of things I'd like to see out of my ideal MCU Spider-Man movie. There's no way I'd ever be competent enough to go out and get this movie made in real life, so I just plan to lay out all of my thoughts for you to enjoy and criticize, and maybe the folks over at Marvel Studios and Columbia Pictures will get a whiff of what I'm cooking and get inspired. This video will borrow footage from other Spider-Man properties to make my points to better help you, the viewer, understand my mindset as I explain them. There's potential for me to spoil more than I already have, so take this as a warning for all Spidey adjacent media. So, without any further delay, here's the pitch for my MCU Spider-Man 4. To start, the premise of this movie boils down to a Spider-Man trope I think a lot of people are familiar with by now. Peter misjudging the balances of his new life. The goal of this movie will be to help Peter better understand the give and the take of living on his own as both Peter and Spider-Man. Typically, when a major event happens that alters Peter's life in some way, he doesn't immediately get on the right foot. Something usually comes along that forces him to course correct when he gets the juggling act wrong, and that's the kind of rebound I want this movie to be. I think MCU Spidey haters are a little too optimistic when it comes to the potential of this movie. Sure, the board has been wiped clean for this new film. No older characters are holding him down, no more legacy of Tony Stark, nothing like that. But Peter is also fresh off the heels of some pretty intense trauma, not only losing his last remaining relative, but now anyone who ever knew him without the mask is going to have completely forgotten about him. meaning he is going to be incredibly lonely and definitely bottling up his feelings. This movie is the perfect jumping off point for Peter to recognize those feelings and potentially grow as a single man in this new era, especially since we're now officially in a post-snap, post-identity crisis era in the MCU. This movie is also heavily implied to be coming out after Avengers Secret War, so we need to take that possibility into account as well when crafting this movie. The setting for this film won't be anything crazy either. No more globe-trotting, no interspace travel, no dimension hopping. Peter is on his own, figuring out his life in New York City. He has an apartment, which means he's financially liable for himself now. Bro's got a credit score now, and he's gotta earn it. We should see various iconic locations throughout this movie as Peter struggles to uphold his rent. I'm talking running bodega counters, a valet parking attendant, digital grocery shopper, and maybe even a pizza delivery boy cameo. The movie should feature iconic New York landmarks in a modern age, with all the MCU iconography that's been shown off until this point. Maybe you could have Peter end up next to the Avengers memorial that Hawkeye stumbles onto in his Disney Plus show, as if he's talking to friends trying to take a load off. Anything to get this world feeling a bit more interconnected. We also need to show off some Spider-Man-esque locations as well, if nothing then to just make sure that his world is getting properly displayed at the same level. Maybe have him swing by May's old place just to see what's happening in it now. Speaking of May, it's a must that he visit her and Ben's grave periodically throughout the film. Depending on the events happening throughout this movie, his position on greeting them and how long he's there should be different, showing how rough of a condition he's in at that point in the film. The words that he says, if any, will be indicative of his current state of mind, and a physical representation of that is crucial to good storytelling here. Other than that, the usual Spider-Man things sprinkled around the scenery. Have an Alchemax billboard appear in the distance. Radios at his odd jobs would be playing the Daily Bugle's broadcasts by Jonah and Betty. Stuff like that. Next, I'll go over the characters, and once I introduce you to some of them, you'll probably have a good idea for what I'm going for here. First, I want to rip the carpet out from under y'all now and just say that I think it's still too early and perhaps foolish to introduce any other Spider people in this movie. I see a lot of people calling for potential Miles Morales, Spider-Gwen, and Clone Saga shenanigans in this movie. I think that's all an absolute mistake, as we still haven't really explored who Tom Holland's Peter Parker is at their core. Without any ties to any of the previous MCU stuff, this Peter is in a prime position to really open up about who he is and who he wants to be. So the main protagonist of this film will be Peter Parker and no other Spider people. The supporting cast for this movie is also probably just as important as the main character this time around, since we'll basically be replacing everyone who used to be here for a cast as well. Peter's friends are reflective of his current state of mind. The folks that he looks to for support will generally end up being his compass, showing him which way he'll be headed along the narrative path. For this movie, I want to incorporate some Spidey lore mainstays, as well as some recent additions to the MCU. Peter Parker will find a new best friend in the son of Daily Bugle editor Robbie Robertson, the cheerful and understanding Randy Robertson. To accommodate the new theme of balancing his dual identity, I'm leaning on Felicia Hardy being the new love interest for Peter. I also want Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil, and Johnny Storm, aka the Human Torch, in this story as well. Having Randy as Peter's new best buddy solves a couple of problems with erasing Peter from everyone's memory. To start, they can easily meet each other after Peter finally ends up working freelance for the Daily Bugle. This will solve a long-time request from fans everywhere to have Peter work at the newspaper outlet again, since he stepped away from it after Spider-Man 3. Yes, I know, technically he did work like that in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but but that was a quick little cameo appearance on a laptop screen for all of like 3 seconds, and I like to forget that that movie exists all the time, so I'm not gonna count it. Anyway, since Peter is knowingly blocking people from his old life out, he'll need a way in to get work at the Bugle taking pictures of himself. Randy Robertson is a wonderful character for a few reasons. Randy and Peter hit it off almost immediately after they meet in the comics, as they both are close with his father, Robbie. It gets to the point where eventually the two of them share an apartment in the comics too, and while I think that's a potential plot point we can come up with somewhere in this movie, either after Randy hears about Peter being evicted during the movie, or maybe at the end once they've gotten closer, it's best to spend time in this movie building up that friendship first by having them share time together, working for the newspaper, and other hobby interests. Peter could help Randy with college schoolwork, and Randy could help put his pictures on Jonah's desk. A mutually beneficial relationship that reminds Peter how good it is to have regular people friends on the street is a must-have for this movie. To tip the counterweight, I think it'd be a really smart idea to introduce Felicia Hardy, aka the Black Cat, onto the scene as well. The only stories of street-level crime and heroism being told in the MCU right now are in Disney Plus shows like Miss Marvel, Hawkeye, and Echo. The movies from Phase 4 and 5 so far have been focused on the multiverse and cosmic imbalance, so I think it's time to fix that. Felicia Hardy will prove to be the side of the coin that Peter's never really gotten to see so far in his superhero career. Ever since being scouted by Tony Stark, Peter's been very nose to the grindstone in being the ideal hero, with all of that having been washed away with his death and being forgotten, and being stricken down to the bare-bone responsibility instilled in him by Ben and May. Peter has a lot of options about what type of hero he wants to be. So while Randy can be the anchor that supports Peter Parker, having Felicia Hardy in his life will tempt Spider-Man with the lure of amusement and thrills. The two can originally meet as their alter egos out in the streets, while Spidey is working the criminals of New York. Later down the line, when Peter and Randy are at private events being supported and covered by the Bugle, Felicia can show her true face. But it's important that we don't dig into her character immediately. Felicia herself should spend as little time on screen as possible. We don't want to give her identity away in the early minutes of the film. She should instead show up as Black Cat almost exclusively throughout this movie, only revealing her identity towards the ending, maybe to help deliver the emotional punch in the third act. Her role should strictly be used to convey the fun being a super person can be. When Spider-Man isn't on the rooftops being seduced by his feline counterparts, he'll be spending time wading through the criminal underground with other heroes. Spidey is used to either fighting off would-be thugs and saving people in the daylight hours, but this movie is going to help him really understand the weight of the issue by introducing him to someone who's been neck-deep in it since the beginning, Daredevil. While Mr. Murdock was first introduced into the MCU proper during No Way Home, his cameo was simple and sweet as an attorney for Peter. They've slowly been ramping up his appearances by having Vincent D'Onofrio's Kingpin appear in Hawkeye, as well as giving Daredevil a fight scene in Echo. This movie would theoretically appear after Avengers Secret War, which means the Disney Plus show Daredevil Born Again would have aired as well. Depending on where that goes, having him show up in the next Spider-Man movie could be an interesting encounter, since this movie will be about discovering Spidey's true limits and his imbalance in his life, with Peter making it his goal to single-handedly clean up the city and stop every criminal. Having Daredevil appear and really show him the roots that the crime bosses of New York have planted in the city could be a wonderful wake-up call. The differences in their methods, combat style, and overall personality would make for a drastic contrast and provide interesting scenes. The gruff older man telling the youngster off trope is as old as they come, but it works and I like it, so it's in the movie. Johnny Storm should also make an appearance in this movie. The Fantastic Four are going to make a huge splash in this universe when they finally hit the big screen. Since his inception, Spidey and the Fantastic Four have been inseparable. They've been back and forth in their lore multiple times, eventually getting to the point where Johnny and Spidey became best friends. Johnny has a personality Peter wishes he could imitate. The outgoing, confident in everything he does type. Johnny has provided a light to Peter's world on more than one occasion. So I think it's important that to balance the grim superhero work of Daredevil and the seductive temptation of Black Cat, Spidey should be able to confide in somebody who loves being a hero and understands the meaning of family more than anyone. Johnny Storm being there to save Peter from something really big during the day and backing him up when he gets in over his head would be a big deal on multiple fronts. In later parts of the movie, when Peter doesn't know where to turn and he can't make up his mind, or he's leaning too far into the darkness, Johnny can show up to remind him of his past, to set the example of fighting for friends and family, and to only let yourself actually rely on people who are deserving of it, not those who would take advantage of him to get what they want out of him. Plus, the more appearances of the first family in any MCU projects, the better. Alright, so now we're going to talk about the part that y'all are waiting for. Spidey has an incredible rogues gallery. So before I explain the basic plot I want out of this thing, let me just state who we're going to be dealing with as the main antagonists of this movie. I said earlier that the main goal for Spider-Man as a hero in this film would be tackling the criminal underground directly. I really like this idea, as Spidey should have all of this confidence and wit in him now. He's fought aliens in space, he's teamed up with alternate versions of himself. What is there that he can't defeat all by himself anymore? Well, I'll tell you who. The big man himself, Tombstone. Lonnie Lincoln is such a good choice for leading antagonist, and I'll tell you why. This film is leaning on a very Spider-Man-centric storyline. Everything is going to be about Spidey's choices, his confidence, and his ambition. So what better way to counter that with one of the biggest thorns in his character's side since his debut? Even in the most recent story arc of Amazing Spider-Man, Peter was forced to team up with Tombstone in order to settle a gang war that ended up with him betraying the Webhead and climbing into the highest seat of criminal power in Manhattan. So to introduce Tombstone in this movie, all about Peter taking on the criminal underground with temptation and brutality on either side of him, as well as befriending the son of Tombstone's greatest target, the story practically writes itself. This decision also manages to dodge the potential of Kingpin, another large crime boss in the city, being taken down and stripped of his power in Daredevil's show, which should come out before this. Tombstone is known to have vast alliances and connections with many of Spidey's rogues as well, so appearances from Hammerhead, Scorpion, and others aren't off the table here either. Now that I've established the basic concept, setting, and main players in this thing, let me go over the core plotline of this movie. Keep in mind that this is a basic outline and by no means is a final draft, so if there's some goofiness and consistency, please forgive me. The film can open up on a classic heist in progress. Two thugs bust out of a jewelry store carrying a load and dash into an alley. These guys can be any thugs, but if you want to make them cameos of other Spidey foes before they got superpowers, then go ahead and do it. They'll stumble around until they think they're in the clear before being picked up by Spider-Man. He'll dance around them, poking and prodding, trying to get their boss's name, but to no avail. He leaves and starts swinging again, checking his police scanner to see what else is going on. Eventually, he gets a lead on an arms deal going on and heads out. Spider-Man is waging a one-man war on crime, busting crimes small and large, trying to get to the top of the organizations, calling the shots. So far, he hasn't been able to come up with much, only the name of the gangs involved and an alias, the Big Man. His work as Spider-Man has left him battered and bruised and leaving little time during the day to socialize. Peter Parker has gone through many different jobs since living on his own, none of which are worth much merit, only paying the bills that are way overdue. Peter will spend the first few minutes of the movie showing off this imbalance, showing him busting small criminal deals while not advancing up the chain much. In the daytime, he'd be shown fumbling his jobs, maybe even going through one or two in the bounce between the two lanes of his life. Eventually, he'll hear some dude talking about sending his picture of Spider-Man to the Daily Bugle for cash, giving him the idea to exploit the person publicly slandering his identity for money. Somewhere along the line, he'll discover Black Cat breaking and entering into an upscale condo. The two will do their flirty tango fight thing as he tries to stop her, but she'll eventually manipulate his horniness and escape. Spidey will get distracted when he hears some thugs in the condo say the name Big Man, talking about a massive deal going down that he'll be present for. The next day, Peter encounters Randy on the street, waiting for Betty Brant as the two go to work. He ignores them and sets up at the spot waiting for thugs to arrive, though when they do, Spidey instead encounters Hammerhead for the first time, brutally thrashing Spidey until Daredevil appears to bail him out. The two break apart the meeting, though Hammerhead and a few others escape after using explosives and fire to distract them. Daredevil chastises Spidey, then attempts to chase the villains while Spidey saves the thugs from perishing in the explosions. Spidey tracks down Daredevil, who again gives him shit for his naivete and inexperienced ways. Daredevil takes him on a tour through Hell's Kitchen to show him the impoverished people struggling under the big man's boot. Spidey leaves frustrated and beaten and oversleeps the next morning, getting fired from his job yet again. Peter then meets Randy on the street, who invites him to check out the Bugle with him to look for work. Peter is introduced properly to Jonah, who swears that he's seen him before somewhere. But after bad-mouthing Spidey, Peter takes it as a challenge to prove him wrong with good photos. Robbie is introduced to Peter, who encourages him. After an awkward reintroduction to Betty Brant, Peter leaves reinvigorated at the thought of having a new job and friends. That night, Spidey meets Black Cat again, who has taken an interest in him. The two do the flirty fighting thing again before Cat takes him to the home of an unidentified crime boss for a job. Spidey agrees to go with her in case she gets in trouble and to find clues about the big man. Spidey realizes they've broken into the home office of Lonnie Lincoln before getting busted by security, being led by Mac Gargan, free from prison and now on Lincoln's payroll. After they flee, Cat gives Spidey a smooch and leaves. The following day, Jonah says that he isn't impressed with Peter's pictures of him fighting with Gargan, but he bides them anyway. Realizing he needs to get serious in both his crime fighting and getting some decent money, he bears down on finding out who the big man really is. Spidey returns to the location he met Black Cat and infiltrates the building, which is occupied this time by New York's high society, including Janice Lincoln and Felicia Hardy. Confused, Spidey leaves, but is attacked again by an ambush of heavily armed goons being led by Gargan. Spidey is able to subdue them and evade the ambush before escaping. He meets up with Randy and begins asking him about the Lincoln family, and upon hearing the name Tombstone that Lonnie received in prison, Peter finally connects the dots. Just then, Randy receives a phone call from the police, who tell him that a group of armed insurgents, being led by a man in a green suit and a huge tail, attacked the Bugle and kidnapped his father. Randy is given the alleged location of his father's captivity, where the gang has demanded Spidey's appearance in exchange for letting Robbie go. Spidey foolishly shows up alone and is attacked by Gargan in his new scorpion suit, who subdues Spidey with toxins and hallucinogenics. Tombstone appears personally to attack Spidey, but is saved by another appearance of Daredevil, who tracked them through the same information given to Randy. After they escape, Daredevil offers his assistance in helping to get Robbie Robbie back, though Spidey has no idea where he is or how he's gonna fix things. He goes home to get some rest, but the next day, all hell has broken loose in New York City. Tombstone has sicked his gang network on the city, demanding Spidey give himself up. Spidey goes throughout the city diffusing as much of the carnage as he can, but is quickly losing his confidence. Johnny Storm then appears to help Spidey stop a helicopter from falling out of the sky, and Spidey gently confides in him. Johnny is able to lift Spidey's spirits and encourages him to make amends to the Robertsons. Spidey agrees to take responsibility that night, with Daredevil's help, infiltrating Tombstone's compound. They're forced to duke it out with a wave of heavily armored henchmen before Scorpion and Hammerhead show up. They take each other on 2-on-2 until Hammerhead cues Scorpion to separate them. Hammerhead pulls Daredevil into a munitions storage area. Scorpion pulls Spidey into a cargo loading dock. The battles are brutal, with Hammerhead breaking Daredevil's arm and Scorpion using more poisons on Spidey. Daredevil beats Hammerhead using explosives and begins collecting evidence of Tombstone's involvement. On the other side, Spidey uses Scorpion's own toxin against him to make him spill Robbie's location. Spidey finds him in one of the shipping containers in the loading bay, but is ambushed by Tombstone, who comes in swinging. Spidey does battle with Tombstone, and the fight is much harder here. Tombstone uses technique and surprising speed and toughness to overpower Spidey, who's forced to use reason to make him let down his guard. After Spidey is eventually able to trigger Tombstone by mentioning thugs destroying the streets around Janice's apartment, and after Daredevil shows up with evidence to link his official business to the compound, Tombstone concedes and agrees to turn himself in, saying he has much faith in his legal team at his disposal. The film ends with Peter shaking hands with Daredevil, who notes something about a change in the way Spidey talks. Peter is then seen holding a handful of boxes with his belongings in it, the door opening to Randy's apartment with him welcoming Peter inside. That evening, he tells Peter to hurry finish unpacking as he's bringing him to a get-together with some friends. At the college party, Peter is introduced to Randy's friends, such as Hobie Brown, Kenny McFarlane, and Gloria Grant. At the party, Peter bumps into Felicia Hardy, who calls her close family friend over to introduce him. At the fruit punch table, Peter shakes hands with Harry Osborn before the scene cuts to black and the credits roll. Phew! This was a mean one to type out. This was even a shortened version of the original script that I had typed out. I had to trim 17 pages to just 8 to get this thing done in a timely manner. I know I said the plot was only a bit of an outline, but honestly, I was just having too much fun with it. Spider-Man stories are awesome, and coming up with my own becomes a steadily advancing case of scope creep. I want so many things to get done, with so many people to arrive in this story, and make an impact right away. But I think this is what makes the most sense. There are probably a few plot lines that can be ironed out in here. I won't pretend like it's perfect, but honestly, I am quite happy with it. One of the main goals for Sony and Marvel regarding the MCU is that they want to involve characters, both heroes and villains, that aren't necessarily at the front of Spidey's character lineup. That's why Ned was Peter's best friend in the first trilogy, not Harry. It's why his villains were Vulture and Mysterio, because Green Goblin and Doc Ock were already done before. I think Tombstone is a wonderful choice for a villain, especially if you're going to involve the Robertsons in Peter's life. And I really want a Scorpion payoff to that Gargan appearance in Homecoming. That removal was just criminal. Also, teasing Black Cat as a mainstay with the symbiote in this universe just helps to build something awesome later on as well. Anyway guys, this is just my interpretation of the best things about Spider-Man and his lore, and what I'd like to see on the big screen eventually. Of course, anything I come up with is likely never gonna make it into a movie, but if Amy Pascal and Kevin Feige start throwing around the idea of a Robertson and Tombstone storyline, with a Daredevil and Johnny Storm cameo, then you heard it from me first. I've got my eye on you, Marvel Studios. Let me know what you thought about my thoughts in the comments below. I certainly want to hear about what you thought of my Spider-Man movie pitch, as well as your own thoughts, hopes, and dreams for the future entries in the Wallcrawler Silver Screen franchise. Don't forget to drop a like and share this video with your friends who like Spider-Man and superhero stuff in general. That's gonna do it for me today, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to stay awesome, and be kind and rewind. Have a wonderful night. Excelsior!